Consider the simplest possible trade-off model. Suppose cash flows decline deterministically and the firm issues perpetual debt. Then the firm will default once its cash flows fall below required debt payments. And if all remaining cash flows are lost in default, make a simple assumption, then the firm trades off the upfront gains of borrowing versus losses in default. Starting with no or low leverage, of course, the initial gains outweigh the costs, and increasing leverage adds value relative to an all-equity firm. And this continues until, at an intermediate level of leverage, firm value reaches a peak and then starts to decline as leverage becomes excessive, giving us the usual hump shape for firm value as a function of leverage. Okay, so let's set leverage back to the static optimum level here. And now suppose that after some time has elapsed, the firm has an opportunity to rebalance its debt. How would it choose to do so? From an ex-ante perspective, because the cash flows have declined, it would be optimal to commit to reduce its debt and adjust leverage back to the optimal level. This hypothesis that firms rebalance to the optimal target leverage underlies the standard predictions of trade-off theory. But of course, with full commitment, we could do even better than this. The firm could wait and then repeatedly reduce debt in a way that avoids default altogether. That would become riskless, and in the limit, the first best could be attained with 100% debt financing. In other words, with full commitment, the trade-off of trade-off theory disappears. In this deterministic setting, this commitment would be simple to implement by choosing the debt maturity to match that of the cash flows. Now suppose the firm does not commit to a policy ex ante. When faced with the opportunity to rebalance, what will it choose ex post? In this case, from shareholders' perspective, the existing debt payments are sunk. And so, just as they did initially, shareholders will find it attractive to borrow against the remaining residual cash flows. Thus, to maximize its share price, the firm will choose to issue more debt ex post. In other words, rather than rebalance to the optimum, the firm will choose to ratchet up leverage even further. This leverage ratchet effect, which I explore in my paper with Anat, Martin, and Paul, is quite general, and it implies that leverage choices are essentially irreversible. As you might anticipate, this irreversibility will impact the debt price, and, as with any real option, potentially slow the firm's leverage adjustment. Let's see how this plays out in equilibrium as we increase the frequency of leverage adjustment. Shown here is the equilibrium if the firm can choose leverage only once. Now suppose it can reoptimize every 10 years, then every 5 years, every 1 year, monthly, weekly. Note the key features that emerge as we increase the frequency of trade. The firm issues new debt at each opportunity, leading to higher ultimate debt. But because the debt price anticipates this future issuance, its initial yield is higher, and so the firm's initial demand for debt is reduced. Finally, note that in the limit with frequent trade, the debt adjustment is a smooth policy. Now, in this example, with perpetual debt, the debt level is always increasing because the debt is permanent. In reality, debt levels decline when debt matures. Let's repeat the same analysis with amortizing debt. For example, suppose 5% of the debt matures each year, as shown in the static equilibrium here. As we increase the frequency of trade, again, we see the same convergence to a smooth adjustment policy. As before, the debt level gradually increases at first, but now ultimately falls when leverage becomes very high and the rate of new issuance is below the rate at which debt matures. The same analysis can be extended to a continuous time setting with stochastic cash flows and asset growth as developed in my work with Jiguo He and also Jiguo and Fabrice Torre. In that case, we see the same smooth adjustment process with leverage trending to a target at which new issuance balances maturity and growth. How does this pattern of issuance impact valuation? In the static model, valuation increases as we shorten the maturity of debt. And in the deterministic case, we can even achieve the first best when the debt maturity matches that of the cash flows. But as we increase the frequency of trade, the share price falls and ultimately collapses to the value of the unlevered firm. the tax and liquidity benefits of debt are fully dissipated. The only case for which this does not happen is if the debt matures fast enough that the debt is risk-free. But this is only true in our simple deterministic example without any noise. Once the cash flows are risky, the same result holds no matter how short we make the maturity of debt. In other words, short maturity does not resolve the commitment problem, and we get the full dissipation of the gains from trade. Let me try to provide some intuition for the analytics behind this result. To do